I've gotten a lot of feedback from those of you out in the audience, and all of it's been positive. So I do want to thank these folks again for coming. They came on behalf of the respective agencies to do this, and here we are. And from a conversation a few months ago to today, we put this program together, and I think you've done an excellent job. So if you would, please give one more round of applause. So our moderator for this panel has been my true partner from the get-go. As I told some of you the story, the concept of this program started over my need for and want for more education in this area and his knowledge base, and a conversation that happened over some pizza. So Dr. Albert Klein, though, is an assistant professor, educator at the University of Cincinnati in the School of Public and International Affairs. He's an educator at the Ohio Cyber Range Institute and a fellow at the Center for Cybersecurity and Policy. Prior to this, Dr. Klein was an attaché for NATO and the European Union while serving as an associate general counsel for the U.S. Air Force in Brussels, Belgium. Dr. Klein served in the United States Air Force as a judge advocate, retiring as colonel with duty assignments around the globe, including Germany, Iceland, Belgium, Qatar, and Okinawa. Colonel Klein had experience on the Joint and Air Staffs and was the first judge advocate at the U.S. military delegation to NATO. He was the senior Air Force JAG in the CENTCOM AOR and the senior operations JAG in the Indo-Pacific AOR. Dr. Klein holds a PhD in international relations, a Master of Laws in international and comparative law, a Master of Science in International Relations, and a Juris Doctorate. Dr. Klein is licensed to practice law in Ohio and the U.S. military courts. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon. Briefly, I want to make sure that you know the rules of engagement here. The rules of engagement are very simple. I'm going to start with this panel of excellent professors and practitioners. The important thing is that you now have had basically 5 presentations, which would normally take a term in school. So we thank you for that. That's at a minimum.
That's right. Let's say 18 hours of credit, I think.
So we're going to try to get 18 hours of credit because you've expanded far out. I just wanted to make sure that you know that I will come around to you when you have a question. Please put your hand up. I will start the questioning. Try to get this going. So I know that from talking with a number of you that you have questions, so please don't be shy. And remember to have the courage to stand up and say, yes, I have a question. Okay?
I'll try.
We will take care of these non-lawyers. The first question that I wanted to ask of all of you is, what resources or recommendations do you have for lawyers who want to build their knowledge of this area of cyber security law? And I'll let anyone who wants to start. Kirk, you look like you have a thought.
Well, so there are a lot of resources out there. So take a class. I mean, I do think you can, even if you can audit a class at one of the local universities. There was a lot of good resources in the material given today. If you're a contract lawyer primarily, pay attention to, there's some really good laws out there on technology contracts, which cover also how to defend against and how to control cyber risks and related risks in your agreements. Again, there's a lot of good resources out there. The International Association of Privacy Professionals, which I was affiliated with for a lot of years, it does a good job of bridging the technical and the policy. And I know it says privacy, but because privacy and security are sort of two sides of the same coin, you can't have privacy without security, right? they do have a lot of good, very accessible material, books, frankly, and they aren't, I mean, they aren't more than 150-ish pages, and they're written in an easy to understand way. And they do have they have some that are more legal, but they also have several that do kind of cover the gambit and fuse the technical and the policy and the legal together.
Thank you. May I ask the professors?
Sure, I'll go ahead and start. I really, when I got into cyber law, I realized I wanted to make sure I understood the cyber. And talking to cyber operators, they said, well, you know, there are a number of certifications that they go through. A+ teaches you the basic computing, and the way I view it is it's enough to get you to be a Geek Squad member. But then there's Network Plus, where you learn networking and how it all comes together, and then Security Plus, which is, you know, how to secure it all. And those resources around those are readily available, even if you're not looking to take the test. So you can buy the books. There are a million YouTube videos that systematically go through all of them, and there's just a million resources around those. So those are a really good starting point.
So let me the CISSP for dummies, and you'll laugh, but it was, I probably studied for the CISSP 3 times, and I ultimately never had enough time to actually do it justice. But there's some study manuals along with that, but any of the dummy books, frankly, give you enough to kind of get started and directionally go. But the CISSP for dummies is actually a really good read.
Thank you.
I think it'll just rotate.
So just a couple quick thoughts. So one is taking advantage of this cyber world that we live in, where there's just an immense wealth of information that's available online. You know, if you're a musician and you hear a song and you want to learn how to play it, you can find something on YouTube, right? Somebody who's going to show you exactly how to play that Led Zepp solo, right? It is very similar with computer issues, legal issues on all sorts of things, right? Chances are, unless it's a really novel legal question, you know, you can find just an abundance of free information, right, online. And, you know, a lot of law firms, right, will just proactively put out information, you know, on these topics. The other thing I would say is to recognize both your strengths and your limitations from a generational standpoint. There's, you know, generational knowledge is real, and, you know, the younger generations have just an intuitive feel for so many of these computer issues that, you know, older generations, you know, don't have. I even hear this from my law students, right? So my law students are predominantly 22 to 25 or 26, right? They even talk about how their younger siblings, right, are, from a tech standpoint, already moving ahead of them. You can only imagine for, you know, the Xers, the boomers, the millennials, right? So I would just say, you know, draw on that. If you've got coworkers, you know, who are just generationally adept, you know, just talk with them about computers. You can learn all sorts of interesting stuff. And as a lawyer, you'll start issue spotting, and that's always a valuable thing to do.
Kevin, you look like you have a remark here.
Well, Dakota hit on it. Resources, right? Look around you. We're all resources. Your networking, figure out, as Dakota said, where your gaps and limitations are, and then find, build in your network a SME that you can call and talk to about that very thing. Because, as I said before, there is no such thing as a SME of the entire domain of cybersecurity. It does not exist.
Janine?
So my resources are going to be a little bit more Homeland Security focused, but you can look at the Homeland Security Digital Library that's managed by the Center for Homeland Security and Defense as well. And then if you are looking for specific cybersecurity courses, FedVTE has a lot of just free, basic, medium, advanced type courses, so you can just kind of take what you're interested in different subjects. So there are good resources out there that are free to look at.
If I could say another thing, that it's very important to make sure that you have some expert out there for whatever. So, for example, I bother Kevin all the time with issues, and we have developed a relationship so that we can ask, on my part, the dumb questions of the technical side, and he is very brilliant on the legal side, so I don't have to answer any questions, so that's good. Thank you, panel. Is there any questions out here, or should I continue? Okay. This is the aerobic portion of my
I'm going to go back to cyber war. You painted a picture, Dakota, of us responding, whether you acknowledge it or not. Stuxnet, Korea, go dark for 3 hours. I realize a lot of people here are attorneys, so I'm just going to paint the scenario. Defense contractor, maybe government contractors as a whole saying, I got hacked. DOJ's coming after me now. I see us not responding maybe proportionally to China and Russia or to those people that sponsor those actors. Do you see us, maybe this is geared more towards Mark and Dakota, but feel free, anybody. Do you see this more of a reaction by Cyber Command, NSA, to do a Stuxnet, to do a North Korea going dark, to maybe mitigate some of this state-sponsored hacking as opposed to just indictments? Hope that makes sense.
It does. Excellent question. And if you would sign up for the 3-class session version of what I offered here, I wish I could, just invite folks in, but you have to be admitted to the Moritz College of Law. So something, what I'm getting at here is, so something I didn't get to is one of the most interesting pieces of the cyber puzzle, which is the approach that the U.S. Cyber Command, U.S. Cybercom, has taken with the statutory authorities that Congress has granted to Cybercom and the Secretary of Defense and the President, starting in 2012 and going up through recent years, amending them, developing them, have taken those authorities and have adopted a strategy that Cybercom calls defending forward. And another term for it is active defense. So basically the idea is that they are going to penetrate computer systems abroad, and especially in the countries that are of greatest concern, Russia, China, North Korea, Iran. There are other actors as well, but those are named in the statute. And get a sense of what their capabilities are, what their intentions are, and try to intercept attacks, disrupt attacks, damage capabilities, right, before they even come here. And it has been very active, and there's been a really interesting conversation about that, about, to what extent, should we have, the United States government, operating, basically beyond our borders, right, in just kind of a 24/7 way, right, trying to, disrupt a lot of those attacks, or, is that not an appropriate role for the United States government to take in the world? Are we basically at cyber war? And I think kind of the public doesn't completely understand that. But I think when you read the statutes, especially Section 1642 of the fiscal 2019 National Defense Authorization Act, it reads like a force authorization just for cyberspace, and that is how it has been used, really, really aggressively. We all see, the spam. We read about the cyber attacks. Your entities, companies, government, whatever, like they've been on the receiving end. So it feels like we're getting pelted, right, and we're not doing anything. And so I hear what you're saying, and I completely understand that, and I find it completely frustrating too, right, that all of us in cyberspace are just like we're going up against the Chinese government, right? And, some like shadowy Russian hackers, right? But what we don't see and what we can say based on the public record, right, is that there is a whole range of cyber attacks that never get here, right? Because our cyber warriors are out there defending forward. And so that's for the United States, including, as I talked about, right, private sector actors, right? The United States government is doing that, and it's been especially active too with regard to Ukraine. So Cybercom, in the time leading up to the full-scale Russian invasion in February 2022, and then when that kicked off and ever since has been doing a great amount of activity to disrupt Russian cyber attacks in Ukraine, which is part of why we haven't seen in Ukraine what I think a lot of people who were military analysts, cybersecurity experts expected, which was as soon as the war kicks off, the Russians are just going to turn off the power in Ukraine. And we know they have the capability because they did that at a couple points for parts of Ukraine before the full-scale invasion in February 2022, turning off the power in the winter in Kiev to send a message to the government like, hey, you better play ball with us, or we're going to let you freeze. But instead, what we've been seeing in the paper, right, is the Russians are using expensive cruise missiles to attack Ukrainian power stations, right? It's not the cyber attacks. And so the story, and again, this has been covered, not in a really prominent way, but if you look for it, you can find it, right? I think a lot of why the Russians have just not been anywhere near as successful as I think people expected was because of cybercom, and I think other NATO states as well. You're just doing some forward defense to kind of intercept, So it's out there. I wish there was a better approach, right, that could save us all from what we're seeing. But interesting question that Kirk and I were just talking about at lunch, and Janelle, I mean, just like how do you get from where we are to a better defended, United States, right, without a lot of liberty intrusions, right? I don't have a great answer for that.
I would kind of just build on that, and from more of a pragmatic perspective, thinking about those high visibility, like what the North Koreans did to us in terms of like, well, let's go back after them with an OCO mission of our own, and let's create some fireworks and some real havoc over there. And really, when you think about the nature of cyber warfare, and especially offensive weapons, there's some real cost to that. So, we can't stockpile cyber attacks like we do bombs, because basically these are one-time use only. They're also very ephemeral. So we could have access to a system, and then there's an operating system upgrade. They actually patched, and now we no longer have access, and that cyber weapon we had is no longer valid. And then the other aspect is there's a real life choice, and Dakota spoke earlier about the dual hat with the NSA and the Cyber Command, because if we're going to do something along those lines, a lot of times in the process you're burning a lot of intelligence. And so there's actually a fairly large discussion between the intelligence folks and the military side on, do we burn the intel value that we're getting in order to have some kind of Title X military effect or not? So it's a pretty complicated calculation that goes into, especially the more of the OCO spectacular type attacks.
Kevin?
No, actually, he covered exactly what I was going to say. Just because we saw it coming doesn't mean we're going to stop it. Right. We don't want to telegraph all our capabilities. We don't want to burn a 0 day that we're aware of. We have to balance that operational objective with a strategic objective, and sometimes that strategic objective wins the day. And there's also a reason why we resist the idea of codifying a cyber act of war. There's a reason for it.
I'll say that I'll play devil's advocate a little bit. I think that we're a lot more impotent than we think we are. I hope that we have cyber warriors out on the frontier fighting the good fight. I can tell you, having been on the defensive side for almost 30 years, and I said to Dakota, I mean, you get damn tired after years and years of just continually not being able to fight back. I was part of the hackback movement about 10 years ago, really doing a lot of research, trying to figure out how we could effectively do what our enemies have effectively outsourced a lot of this to pirates. They're privateers, right? Remember back, well, you showed it, letters of marque, right? I'd go up to a merchantman, I'd say, you can put cannon on your ship, you fly our flag, and then you go out and sink the French or the British flags, depending on who we're fighting at that time. And so that's effectively what they've done. They give them aid and comfort. They protect them. I imagine that they're also getting, they're obviously getting financial benefit from the relationship both ways. So, yeah, I mean, I don't have a top secret clearance, but from what I'm able to see, there's a lot of not wanting to compromise sources, which ultimately leads to, devastating attacks across, our economy. Again, having been on a highly regulated side, the thing that gets me is that the victims are then, who are generally, I don't care how much you spend. My old company spent almost $100 million a year, and occasionally we still got owned. The victims are then pilloried by regulators, attorney generals, or whatnot, and have to spend untold millions of dollars defending themselves, and then getting reputational damage. So I'll tell you, I see it a little differently. Being in this role, I have a slightly different perspective, but I still think that I would like to have a more obvious offensive capability that we are assured is working. We were talking earlier today, and I heard this 10 years ago or 12 years ago when I was in a briefing with a nationwide telecom operator about how they were going to sell us a DDoS solution because they had visibility on their network of all the traffic coming in, and they could actually see the attacks building, right? They knew it days in advance, right? And they wanted to charge us for a tool that would then, once it got to a certain level, they would just direct it off and it would go into a black hole. And I was in a briefing yesterday where a vendor was trying to sell the same capability to the state of Ohio. Actually, I'm not sure whether we already own it or they were trying to upsell us, but again, what I was told was that the DHS and DOD have this capability. They get it from the telecoms, and they don't want the telecoms to give it away to private sector. So, don't know if that's true. That was one person in a big briefing, but I do think that there are things we can do collectively. I mean, we have to think more in terms of collective defense than each of us individually. I look at it as the frontier. Right? Think about I loved reading westerns when I was a kid, and I loved John Wayne movies. So, right, you've got the fort and you've got the pioneers, right? And individually, each little house is indefensible, right? You can only stick so many rifles out the window, and there's an asymmetric attack. You've got 200 hostiles versus like 3 people, right? But if they fall back into either a wagon train and circle the wagons, or fall back into some sort of a fort or a building that, you have hundreds of people, right? You've got a much better chance of resisting. And again, it's just scalability. And I think we need to think about how we incent that at a state and a federal level, that industries coalesce. I don't think, there might be antitrust issues. I don't think so. But there's no reason why every water organization in Ohio shouldn't sort of be collectively part of an organization with a managed services provider who deals with their network. And, so they pool their scarce resources, all of which individually, they do not have enough resources individually to defend themselves, but if they pool their resources, they can get a better collective defense, together than alone. I think that's our own, but then that's where we're talking about the great Chinese firewall, right? We don't want Big Brother literally, although maybe Big Brother already does listen, but we don't want them actively, that active. I don't know. But I hold for it, but it's something that does piss me off, if you can't tell.
Did you have maybe an idea from the threat assessment level?
No, I think
Okay.
everybody carried it well, yeah.
All right. Any rebuttal? Any further discussion?
I would just add one additional thought in response to, just the excellent comments that we've heard. As we think about, okay, what would a better defense look like for for our country against foreign cyber bad actors? We need to think about just in practical terms, just kind of what that looks like. Like, how is this? Is it all content coming into the United States getting scanned? And if so, who's doing that, right? If it's the private sector that's doing it, potentially, I guess you'd have privacy issues. If you have the government doing it, if it's inside the United States, you've got probably issues under FISA, and you probably have a lot of U.S. person communications coming in that are getting reviewed. And I don't know, maybe you try to, maybe under recently renewed Section 702 of the FISA Amendments Act, maybe something like that. So basically, in short, what 702 says that the government can go to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court and get authorization on a yearly basis for the government going to holders of data, so basically searching inside the United States for the data of non-U.S. persons who are abroad. And that's because we have all this cloud computing capability in the United States, right? So people all over the world, right, have their data inside the United States. You also have data transiting the United States, just the way the global information system is built. The packets of information flow through the areas of least resistance, if you will, on the system, right? So you have a lot of communications that flow through the United States. And traditionally under FISA, if you have the government intercepting communications inside the United States, the government has to go to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court on a onesie-twosie basis. 702, which was passed in 2008, is revolutionary in the sense that, again, the government could get authorization for a program to go to Amazon and Yahoo and whoever, right, and look for the data of non-Americans inside the United States on a series of criteria, right? The massive concern and why 702 almost didn't get reauthorized this time, right? Part of it is just the civil liberties concern, right? Is that that data is heavily mixed with U.S. person data, right? The non-U.S. person data and the U.S. person data. NSA and other government actors have acknowledged that they inadvertently do a lot of overcollection, right? They're collecting and retaining information which is not, which they're not going after, right? So that's with Amazon Web Services, that's with Google, that's with Yahoo, that's, all of them inside the United States with servers and cloud and everything. Now if we're trying to think okay, we're gonna scale this up till we're gonna be scanning everything, right? To try to stop all the cyber attacks. I think it's just I think that over collection issue could get even just bigger and harder. So I think that there's a conversation about that. Some civil libertarians say that basically everything already is getting scanned that's coming in, but we don't have a fulsome public record about that. Anyway, it's a thorny thing, and it's a practical thing for us. It's a liberty versus security balance question for all of us. How much do you trust the government? What should the legal architecture look like? What's the process for reviewing what the federal government is doing, right? Is there a role for the states? Anyway, thorny and complicated and urgent.
Kevin, you look like you had a comment.
Just 9 comments, really.
Those are allowed.
Probably not useful. I mean, I can't believe the federal government would ever abuse the FISA court.
I can neither confirm nor deny.
Oh, yeah. Anyways.
Further comment from any of the panelists, please? And that will not be recorded. Well, let me change up a little bit here. How concerned are each of you about artificial intelligence, and what do you think are the risks that it presents? Ready? Okay, Janelle.
All right, so interestingly, several of us got to attend a White House artificial intelligence presentation down at University of Cincinnati last week, but I think the challenge is that already we don't do a great job with misinformation and disinformation. People share stuff, they absorb stuff, and they don't do a really great job of understanding what's factual and what's been altered. So as AI continues to get more in our lives, I think people have a due diligence to do better recognizing it, really examining it, and we don't do a great job of it. We're very quick consumers. We like things to be a little bit easy, and the AI is everywhere. If you're using your Google Maps, if you're interacting with a service representative at an online store or something like that, we're already, AI is just, it's in our system, it's in our society very deeply, and we just don't do a great job of recognizing when something is factual or not and what that means. I know there's a lot of discussion on whether we require legal watermarks on AI-generated information and things like that. So that's a little bit beyond my wheelhouse with the legal aspect, but it is concerning.
So I don't disagree that I think that deep fakes and other things are but I'm trying to, I look at it as, my lifetime effectively, automated learning started in the late 50s, early 60s, so it pretty much is in line with my life. And I think we've been the beneficiaries of it for, I'm 62 years old, so 62 years, 65 years, something like that. I think it's like any technology, if not well governed, right, it can be abused. And you thought you were going to get through a conference without an AI discussion. I mean, it's almost unheard of these days. But, so in my mind, we're talking about, like what we were just talking about, the asymmetry effect. I think that AI, because our opponents are using robots to attack us, and they're very fast, and human beings cannot keep up with it. So I do think that AI on the security defensive side is a solution that may be a salvation, at least in the short term. From a governance perspective, right, I mean, I don't see it that much different than what we wrestled with 20 years ago with the big data and data analytics issues, right? You still have got potential bias, illegal bias, I'll say, because some biases are actually factually correct. Illegal discrimination, you've got privacy issues, right? It's really just it's just bigger data, and it's faster analysis, and you still have to put the same controls into place with building sandboxes and curating your data. So there's data governance that has to be in place before you're going to do it. You can't just turn ChatGPT on your Medicaid data. You literally will have the largest data breach like in Ohio history, right? Because then it escapes. You've got to corral it. You've got to have access controls on who can go in there and play with it. And then, while it almost never happens this way, you get rid of the sandbox when it's done and scrub the data. So I think, again, I think that this is a continuum. Machine learning, automation has been part of our lives now for 50 plus years, and for the most part, it I think is going to be beneficial. I will say that probably long after, eventually the machines will kill us, but probably long after we're gone from this world.
Kevin, you look like you have a thought.
Well, Kirk covered most of it. So, the time that a threat actor spends in your network to do recon and set you up for their payday could be 6 to 12 months. And AI can facilitate that much faster. Our only defense of this is using AI in defense of AI. And then moving towards a zero trust environments across the board to make it more difficult for those things to happen and easier for us to spot when an attack's happening. But it's going to be immensely costly. So unfortunately it's the way of the future, and we'll have to deal with it in those terms.
Mark, can I ask you to comment on that?
Sure. I think the first thing I'd say is I don't know about you, but I've seen already a number of papers that are ChatGPT generated, handed in by my students, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out. So now, that being the case, I think, that's 3.5. When they get to 5.0 or 6.0, might be a different ballgame. And I think that really goes to, when I thought about like my opening theme of the legal regulation is, fragmented, post hoc, and incomplete, that really comes to mind when you think about artificial intelligence. And the problem is I think the forces that we are about to unleash are so powerful that we need to be thinking about that. And, I think we have an executive order now, but we need to be much, much more ahead of the curve, and I just don't see that happening. So I have some real concerns about it.
And I do want to say one thing about attribution, owning your work and knowing who is saying what. We have this. I don't understand why we don't go after this, but it'd be very simple for the country to set up a PKI environment where everybody has a digital certificate. When you go vote, there's a digital stamp. When you post something on Facebook or LinkedIn, there's a digital stamp. It's positively attributable to Kevin. And then would be very, very, very quickly, we'll be able to filter out all the bots. And
Maybe you want to explain what PKI is.
So it's a public key infrastructure. It's a way for like, there's a public key and a private key, and I believe one of you guys talked about it. So when I put something out there, I put my public key out there, they take that public key, go to the infrastructure and say, hey, this person says who they are, verify that this person is who they say they are, and it comes back and it's not totally foolproof, but it's nearly foolproof, and it'd be very easy for each of us on our driver's license or whatever to have a public digital certificate.
Well, I think that's a really interesting idea. I would love for something to work. I just recall the debates we've had in the country in the past about having even something as simple as, a national ID number, which many countries have, right? But we don't have that. Our social security numbers kind of function that way, right? But we don't have what many other countries have, where there's a national ID card and has not quite all the way there, but something similar to that. We just have so much distrust, right, of government's ability to restrict liberty, right? And so I think navigating this space will be especially difficult. And I think even more difficult too, because again, coming back to the cyber conflict realm, obviously, these advanced AI systems are going to be deployed by state actors, non-state actors, as they launch their cyber attacks. And inevitably, it's going to be used by those on the receiving end as well to fight them, right? So it's going to be basically like, software robots fighting all the time, 24/7, intensely. And you're going to want to have the best cyber robots. And governing that process at the speed of robots fighting, right? Applying law to the speed that robots fight each other, with access to critical infrastructure systems, right? Air traffic control system, water, power, hospitals, right? Driverless cars, millions of driverless tractor trailer semis on the highways, remote powered aircraft. Those are the stakes, and imagine applying law in that context, right? And lawyering in that context. Well, we are entering that world. So it's a fraught place.
Further comments from any of the panelists? I think this is a hot topic.
Then we're getting, I agree. We're lawyers, so I worked for the insurance industry for decades, and one of the things that we started worrying about going back, 10, 12 years ago was autonomous vehicles. Like, what is it? Is it part of the homeowner's policy? Is it a commercial policy? Is it product liability? It's really not, it's not a car anymore, right? Is it a toaster? Is it a dishwasher? What is it? It's a thing that you don't drive, that drives autonomously. It's being programmed by by a third party. And so there were a lot, and I think the autonomous vehicles haven't quite evolved as quickly as we thought they were, I think, at the time. I can remember the Jetsons when we were kids, and we were all going to be going around in, hovercraft. Well, let alone living in space. But yeah, there's a lot of issues around AI. Again, I always try to analogize back to something that I can ground myself to that exists already. And it's like the old look inside the box thing. And so I think we'll figure it out. And ultimately, when there was a policy debate at should the state of Ohio consider like putting a hold on AI for government, like a lot of states have. There are a lot of states executive orders that maybe a third of the states have executive orders like banning AI. And I said, well, that's kind of like the genie is out of the box, right? I have five LLM apps on my phone, right, that I kind of play around with to see whether I always get different answers from different apps. One of them doesn't like anything about guns. I'm serious, because we talk about bias of the output. The bias of who programs them is in there too. So, best AR for home defense, you put it into 5 of them. A couple of them won't even, they'll say, no, I'm not, that's not, I'm not allowed to give that answer back. And so, I think it's a governance issue. We put together a nice guardrail system at the state. We put together a policy under the lieutenant governor. He's very bullish on technology, and we have an AI council that looks at applications that the agencies want to use, for making the product, services, interactions with the citizens better, right? We don't have enough people, right? And so it helps do not more with less, it helps do more with the same, and maybe for less money. So, I think the genie's out of the bottle, and we got to just figure out how to corral this thing. It's a tool, just like a hammer or a gun or a saw or anything that can be used for good or bad, and we'll just have to figure out how to deal with it as we go along. Now, courts, as we all know, are always 50 years behind even us, right? And we're probably, except for maybe Kevin, we're not like technologists by any means. But I think we'll figure it out. At a certain point, I've gotten to the age where if I'm a pessimist, I might as well just give up. So I'm not going to give up. I'm gonna look at the glass half full and think that we can actually do this again, because we've done it in the past. We dealt with scary things like email. Law firms and general counsels freaked out when email showed up in the corporate world like 30 years ago. They freaked out. I actually started giving. I was one of the first people nationwide giving legal advice through email. Right. I created my little banner and because they read it. They wouldn't read a memo. They literally wouldn't open it up and read a memo, and they wouldn't read anything over like 2 paragraphs. So is it better to be slightly less attorney-client privilege, I guess, and have them read your advice, or give them an advice in a memo format that they're not going to read? And I opted for the former. And eventually, practices caught up with us, reality caught up. But I think we'll get through this. Well,
we got through the atomic bomb, and these are the kinds of things. This is a turning point in history, I believe, and I'm seeing some concurrence, but these are the kinds of things that have an opportunity for us as lawyers, us as technologists, to try to get something done in a prospective way rather than reactive. And the fact that we're having this seminar today is kind of, I hope, proactive and will stimulate some further thought. And I think I see some panelists who may want to continue to talk about artificial intelligence in terms of what we see for the future. What are the risks that you see?
Have you seen the video Slaughterbots?
Yeah.
There you go.
So I guess I should explain.
Oh, please.
So basically, it's a short video put out by an NGO against autonomous weapons. But basically, what it postulates is like small artificial intelligence drones with shaped charges that can work in a swarming environment and kill autonomously. And it creates a scenario where it follows, it finds individuals who have seen or are on certain human rights committees and advancing human rights and actually targets them. And, you know, even beyond that, you know, there's the articles that are even out there today on Lavender, which is the Israeli artificial intelligence targeting system that is purportedly being used to assist targeteers in identifying Hamas members through real-time feeds and facial identification with recommendations of targeting types and, you know, do we do a smart bomb? Is this person high enough to do a smart bomb, or do we just do the, you know, the dumb 500-pound bomb? And what the article quotes is that the targeteers are spending about 20 seconds per recommendation. And the recommendation is that they basically look at it and say, is the target a male? Okay, if it's a male, you know, they didn't make a mistake. Go.
Well, if that didn't scare you, does anyone else have any other questions? I have a bunch, but yes.
Have you read about that? It's like a short 8-minute clip.
We've heard a lot about state-sponsored, and one thing I haven't heard much comment on is our ability to identify actors responsible committing fraud against the state who are private actors internationally. Particularly, okay, you can pin down maybe where the signal is coming from, but to the degree of establishing criminal responsibility for massive government fraud. So, comments on that.
So one thing that happens all the time, and this is before MITRE or any of the other great resources do, once they analyze a advanced persistent threat or even just a threat in general, and then they codify their techniques, tactics, and procedures, we can fingerprint an attack and pretty much figure out, because it was repeatable, who's doing it up until the point it's published, and then everybody copycats it. So it's very, very difficult. I think Dakota mentioned it earlier. Attribution is extremely difficult, and they're going to only place their resources in trying to gain attribution on those attacks in which are strategically important.
So one of the things that I worked on in 22 into 23 was part of the problem. Part of the problem with the massive fraud, not just here but in all states, was like COVID. The feds sort of they basically said, just, we're going to shovel money in the front door. We want you to shovel it out the back door. So we weren't authenticating anybody. All right. I'm serious. I mean, if you put a claim in there, so the bad guys figured this out, and they just started creating organic, people and stealing. All right. So what we did was we bought some capabilities and around Ohio ID, and we do now a dramatically better job of authenticating every new applicant, every new person that's trying to, because if you go into JFS or Medicaid, you have to get an Ohio ID. Well, that's our identity and access management platform, and so that platform now is the fraud has dropped off like 95, 96% in the last year. We put it in place last October-ish, September, October. And in fact, some of the unemployment drop that we saw, there was 1 month where we saw unemployment drop, which was really, unemployment hadn't dropped. It just, you know, the fraudsters had actually, we had dried the fraudsters up. So the claims had dried up because we were filtering out the fraud at a much higher level. At one month, I think it was almost 5 or 6% drop. And so, you know, that's how they get in. And so what they've shifted to is they've shifted to stealing legitimate Ohio IDs, phishing people. And so that's hard to stop. We're thinking about doing, and we're starting it started at tax, we're JFS doing it, Medicaid's going to do it. The areas that are giving out the money are going to start using multi-factor authentication so that if your Ohio ID, my Ohio ID, Janelle's Ohio ID gets stolen, right, they're not going to have the second factor, right? They won't have the duo or the passcode to your cell phone, right? Again, our goal is, it's not possible to get to zero, but our goal is to get as close to as possible. And there is a plan, and we're well on the way to curing that. But it's a work in progress. They'll figure a way around it because they're smart, and they'll probably use AI.
So, Kirk, if I could ask you, maybe just to summarize your, I think, very insightful piece of our conversation over lunch about this fraudster problem, right? With, like, you know, all these calls we get, you know, from fraudsters, and the unsolicited texts, the unsolicited, you know, instant messenger messages, you know, all the platforms we're on, right? And, you know, they're trying to, you know, cheat people out of their money in some way. And so what we were talking about over lunch is just, you know, just the massive frequency, right? And, you know, what I found a couple years ago when I got a couple of these calls, and it was plainly some sort of enterprise that was, they seemed kind of more sophisticated than some of them. Basically, they were calling to say, like, you know, there's a problem with your benefits, and, you know, we need your information, you know, to help correct this, and then, like, your bank account to, like, restore your money, you know, whatever. So I decided, like, you know, I was just frustrated by this, so I decided to report it. And it was a little bit more difficult than I thought for law enforcement at a couple different levels, for me to report this to law enforcement at a couple different levels. And so Kirk and I were talking about this, and I thought you had just a very insightful take on this issue. Maybe you could just speak to that for a second.
Well, so I am known for stream of consciousness, and sometimes I forget what I said. But
I could say what impressed me that you said. Or
all right. So what I said was, I think it's the scale of the attempted fraud is so huge that law enforcement has decided that there's nothing they can really do about it, right? Unless Kevin hit it earlier. I mean, the FBI, it's actually about $500,000. The FBI won't even talk to you, and it might even be more than that now with inflation. But the FBI won't even talk to you. It comes down to resources. I mean, there's only, how many are there? A couple thousand FBI agents in the whole country, and there's only about like 8% of them or 6% of them are cyber people. So, 32,000, I think. Yeah, 32,000 FBI?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. There's less FBI than there are policemen in New York City. So, at a certain point, like you prioritize based upon risk. You know, and this might be an application for AI someday, where AI takes all these calls in, because you get a number, right? If they, you know, you could take all of these calls in, and you could build an application that helps you correlate maybe, and then, like Janelle was saying, you could put out, you know, you could put out sort of more instantaneous bulletins to the public, alerting them of things that are happening. The state auditor put out something just a day or two ago about basically, you know, phishing fraud, or financial fraud through phishing, and it's hit. A lot of local governments are getting vished and fished and everything else. And some local government lost $700,000 in an illegal, in an illegal operation. They asked them to, you know, to transfer money to somebody. that sounded legitimate, looked legitimate, and it wasn't legitimate. But I do think it's just, I think there's not, the scale of this, back to sort of my frustration, the scale of this is so huge. I get easily 2 or 3 text messages a day that are fraud. Not counting the fake frauds that the state of Ohio sends me to test me, I probably get a couple of those every day. Our Outlook, Microsoft actually does a pretty good job of actually scrubbing most of the stuff out, but my Gmail doesn't always do that. But that's just it. I think that the problem is it's the scale of it, and so law enforcement, and even in our own, you have to prioritize the finite resources you have to combat the biggest problems, and these are just sort of gnats at the end of the day, and there's a lot, there's billions of them. So now if they all had bombs on them, that would probably warrant some attention. But yeah, I think that was because I just think that, I think attorney generals, when they started the fraud hotlines 15, 20 years ago, right, ID theft was unique, it was new, and I think they're at a point now where, again, they're looking for things that they can actually, and a lot of this is transnational, right? These are call centers in Mumbai and Belarusia and the Cayman Islands, and so we don't have jurisdiction over it, and so law enforcement is relatively incapable of actually doing it, even if we knew who it was, which 99.999% of the time we don't. There's not much they could do. The other thing that I said, I saw a statistic in a briefing yesterday that shocked me, that only 0.05 of all cybercrime ever ends in some sort of a conviction. You think about that. I mean, that's, again, like, you almost say, well, why would we spend like any money then at that level? So in order to actually bite into this, you'd have to spend, I don't know, untold tens of billions of dollars more, and we'd have to have, I don't know.
That number might go up a little bit if we stop hiring the ones that we capture for our purposes.
That's true. That's true.
Further comment? Okay. I'd like to get on to my next question. If you think about the cyber warfare that we've talked, oh, I'm sorry. I'll get the question.
You are like
You just wanted to see me run.
I feel like I need to help you get your steps. So starting with the premise that AI and machine learning are valuable tools that government is going to need to use for efficiency purposes and to remain competitive and meaningful in the marketplace. Going back to something that Kirk alluded to a little while ago, which is bias. Within any system with machine learning, there is going to be the potential for bias. How do you monitor it, and how do you mitigate it? What systems should governments consider putting in place? What sort of safeguards? Is this a real threat?
So theoretically, the bias in the AI systems are only initially, because at a point, an AI is supposed to transcend its initial programming by normalizing with the data it gets across the multiverse. So that's the theory of it. I think we have no choice but to harness and manage AI as it comes out. But I know the government's also really working towards exponentially moving quantum computing into a new level, which will exponentially improve AI overall. Right now, AI is still at a very infantile stage.
Hello, by the way. I didn't notice you back there. One of the best AG people in the United States. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I do think that language matters. And so there are industries, there are processes where so bias is a it's become a loaded word, but you can have biases that are unfair, and you can have biases that are based in reality, right? So I want to see less of this and more of this, right? And so I think it does come down to I would be where the machine learning or the AI is making decisions or helping you make decisions around something that could result in someone being harmed financially or from some sort of service or something like that. I think there should be human beings that are always involved and checking, and you should always be tuning your models, right? The models are going to have to be tuned. If your outcome is that a certain class or type of people is like never getting services, well, that's probably bad, right? And so you have to look at your output, and you should have trained people that can help you do that. And so discriminate. The insurance industry has legal discrimination. There's legal discrimination, illegal discrimination. I think as lawyers we all know what that is. But bias, again, I think, and I hear unfair bias, and those are sort of like you could sit down and drink a 12-pack and debate what that means on any given day, right? Sometimes it's your worldview. It's some people are going to want to maybe give more services to people than others, and those are legitimate debates. And again, our AI should reflect whatever the people's will is, I think. But I don't think AI is a machine, and so back we were talking about one of the controls is I do think human beings shouldn't just let it like loose. I don't think it should be out there without any sort of human oversight or intervention. We're talking about you're joking about nuclear weapons. I mean, nuclear weapons exist still. I hope we never automate it to the point where like there's no human being sitting there saying, is that a hallucination that our AI is telling us that the Russians have just launched all their nukes? Because if we've got the things tuned and our AI hallucinates a general attack and unleashes the hounds, right? It's all over. So I would hope that we, again, back to the governance, I would hope we would put guardrails and some controls around these things, and human beings still need to be in charge.
And many of you may already be kind of aware, but the state of Ohio recently did set up an AI review board. So, for example, our division has a business case before them, for an AI functionality, and I think that's where the caution comes, is they want to make sure that we've thought through this process. We know what we're proposing, what the possible biases might be, how we're going to address that, and I think it's a good start to have that kind of review if you're going to set up new technologies. And also our IT departments have looked at it. We've run the proposals through various different people, and I think that's where you can be cautious. I think there do have to be a lot of steps before you bring new technology, AI technology in.
I see that you are waiting for a comment.
So I just wanted to add, in response to Kirk's comment about the intersection of AI and nuclear weapons in particular. So this is something that the State Department has been working on, the White House, the Defense Department, for a number of years of grappling with the advent of AI and military conflict. We've been talking about AI and cyber, right? Cyber combat, right? But there's the most existential type is nuclear conflict potentially, right? Nuclear deterrence, and so the administration, and in fact very, very recently, has been trying to make the case at high levels to China in particular, but also to Russia and just to the international community. We need some rules on AI, and maybe a good place to start is nuclear weapons. Start with the most terrifying weapons, right, that could end human civilization, and have some rules like, we all agree we're not going to have AI with any sort of launch decision-making capability, right? I think it's reasonable to expect AI to be used to analyze intelligence, analyze information, maybe share information, right? That's a different thing than trigger pulling. because you don't want error. And if you've, something I've worked on throughout my career is the nuclear weapons issue. And if you've studied this at all, you know that there have been a number of just horrifying mistakes with the Russian the Soviet early warning system during the Cold War, the U.S. early warning system, basically false alarms of massive incoming attacks that in a analog era were not forwarded on because there were humans there that looked at this and said, wait a minute, why are we suddenly under attack by 2,000 Soviet nuclear weapons? Why, and on the Soviet side, why are we suddenly under attack by 3,000 American nuclear weapons? But so there were humans, right, who looked at information coming in and made sure we're not sending this to people with trigger pulling capability, right? Well, if we're going to use AI to process information, which I think is inevitable, hopefully still we can have some sort of rule, and hopefully everyone will recognize it as in their self-interest not to give a machine a trigger pulling capability with nuclear weapons. And I think once we get something like that, hopefully through some sort of treaty or something, the instrument doesn't matter, right? But it's like agreement on that, right? Then we can start to extend that out, right? And we're not going to, allow cyber weapons, right, to implicate human lives, right, from a trigger pulling standpoint, right? And just maybe build it out beyond that. But this whole area, robotics, AI, cyber, and the law is such a fascinating, and rich area. And if you want to dive into this, I would just recommend, again, how to educate yourself. Go back maybe where we started. There are a number of blogs that have just really, really terrific pieces on this by people who are practitioners, scholars, some by philosophers, right? Thinking about, again, like, weapons, cyber, law, computers, all this stuff. The Lawfare blog is a really good one. Just Security is another one. There are a few others as well that have just really interesting content and they often run stuff on this. And then there's just beyond that, they're like books and articles. And anyway, it's so fascinating. Or you can do what I did the other night, which is go back and watch Blade Runner again. And it holds up really well. Or Terminator.
Mark, did you have a comment? Kevin?
I do. I just want to make sure everybody is tracking this particular point. AI is not a nation-state resource. I have AI running at home privately right now. So do some of my friends in other cyber. AI is not a resource that you can't have in your house right now on your computer running autonomously. So a lot of people still think that this is something only the governments have, or the big AWS or Azure or whatever. It's not. Yes, absolutely. So the other point is that I want to bring this back to your role real quick, and I kind of wanted to talk about it, but we're running out of time. But the idea is that we talked about all these things to safeguard information that a business unit will collect, right? And their responsibilities thereof. I encourage you guys to go back to your business units or organizations and look at the information that they're covering. I can't tell you how many times I've gone to a client and say, you're collecting all this data on these folks. Why are you collecting all this data? What decisions are you making off of this data? What is the business driver or need for this? There isn't one. Then get rid of the data. Don't have data just to have data. The reason why I say that, because you're going to have on-prem AI soon, and guess what happens when AI ingests information? And if you don't control its access to the internet, you just published everything within your organization to the internet. Big complications.
I have an observation and a question. I watched a CLE that had it was on AI and attorneys, and it had an interchange between the computer and one of the section chiefs, and it was simply about brief writing, and brief writing by AI, and it was about citations, and it said to the computer, this citation that you gave for this case is wrong. It's a wrong, that's not, there's a different case there. And within less than a second, it says, oh, here's the citation. They said, no, that's an incorrect citation as well. Boom. Third one, well, here's the citation. No, that reporter started in 1982. You gave a 1970 case. That's a wrong thing. It's like a child that we will not acknowledge that he did wrong, and the last response was, we don't have that information, but the citation's correct. And so I thought, okay. So I asked my relative who's just got out of college, and he uses AI in his engineering firm all the time. And I said, what's happening here? He says, AI is just responsible to give information, is just answering your question. I said, but that's wrong information. Now, for a case citation, no one will die. But if they use it for bridge engineering or for nuclear weapons defenses, that's a problem. So I look at that and I think, okay, this has really tragic and far-reaching consequences. That's my observation. My question is what role do you see government possibly having? As you say, the genie's out of the bottle. You can't say we're going back to non-email, non-cars, and living on the farm. So I understand that, but what role do you see the government could have, if at all, to try and stop the, I don't know, the wrong data, the wrong use, the dangerous use?
Well, I said that the other thing was a 12, that's a whole case of beer conversation, I think. Yeah, I think it comes down to, so all models aren't the same. Like I said, I have 4 or 5 apps on my phone that I play around with, and they will all give you slightly different answers. Some of them will say, I don't have that information. Others will give you a whole bunch of stuff. The models have to be trained. The models need data. You know, I don't know. I don't know if I want to live in a world where the government is filtering out data and sort of determining what is right and what is wrong. That's just me. I think technology has been democratized enough that the world we would live in where we could control that is not one I'd want to live in. I mean, it would be a police state. It'd be a police state, and we'd have the barcodes that Kevin was talking about implanted on our wrists or something. Yeah, I don't know what the answer is. The government has a responsibility maybe to, like a union. Remember the UL code, or which would certify. I mean, I think there are certain applications that could be certified as more legitimate than others. But I mean, we're getting to a place now where you can actually create a lot of these models yourself. And even if the government were to ban things, right? We've always had an underground. We'll always have a sort of a black market of whatever it is, right? We have legal marijuana, and you can still buy illegal marijuana, from what I understand. So it's been a long time, but
This will be our last comment because I have to go home and read AI-generated papers for my class.
I will say to the other professors here, I have told my students, the only thing, I mean, the AI is at a place now where, look, if like my finals are take home, open book, you have as much, you got 1 day to finish the thing. You can use any source you want. You can even consult lawyers if you want, because in the real world, you're going to have every source available to you. If you use AI and I catch you using AI, that's the only way you'll flunk my class, literally. That's the only way, because I think that cheats them, because even if you use other sources, you have to then synthesize it, and you have to know generally what the answer is, or come up with an answer. So I do think that again, AI is a good tool to augment. I think AI for research is fine, but not to just spit out like a term paper or an opinion or whatnot. But you know, you certainly could use AI to routinize things like the contract templates and stuff like that, and have. I mean, I don't think it's going to get rid of lawyers. I just think it'll require lawyers to be actually smarter.
Mark, final word for you, 1 minute.
Sure. So, you know, to your point, I think, you know, as we see the better versions of these large language models coming, they're minimizing the hallucinations. And so I think you're going to see that get better and better. So that was kind of in my thought on the observation. In terms of your question, I think one of the things we really have to think about is accountability. So when things go south with artificial intelligence, who is on the dotted line? So the attorney who cites a hallucination case, that's going to impact their bar licensure. The engineer who signs off on something, same. So, you know, I think that is, and that's actually a big issue in law of armed conflict in the autonomous weapons. So if an autonomous weapons make a mistake, who is responsible? Because normally it's the command who's responsible. And so how does that work? And I think really focusing on the accountability will be a strong, I guess, a starting point to address those types of questions.
Thank you, and may we show our appreciation to the panel. Thank you.